Aberdeen is Scotland's third largest city, sitting on the northeast coast where the rivers Dee and Don meet the North Sea. It is known as the Granite City. Its buildings cut from the grey stone quarried from the land around it, giving the city a distinctive, austere beauty that reflects the character of the place itself. Aberdeen is a working city. It has always been a working city. For generations, its people built their lives around fishing, farming, and the industries that lined its harbour. By the early 1980s, a new industry had transformed the city almost overnight. The North Sea oil boom had brought money and people and work to Aberdeen on a scale that had never been seen before. The city was changing rapidly, but beneath the surface of that change, Aberdeen remained what it had always been, a tight, proud, working-class community where people knew their neighbours and got on with their lives. It was into that Aberdeen, the Aberdeen of ordinary people doing ordinary things, that George Murdoch was born and raised. George Murdoch was born in Aberdeen in 1924 or 1925. He was known to everyone who knew him simply as Dodd. He was, by every account of those who loved him, an entirely ordinary man in the best possible sense of that word. His nephew Alex Mackay described him as kind and gentle, the nicest of guys. He was friendly and down to earth. He kept pigeons, he enjoyed boating. He had been happily married to his wife Jessie for 37 years. He was the kind of man whose life was measured not in grand gestures, but in the quiet accumulation of ordinary days. A warm home, a devoted wife, simple pleasures, and the companionship of people he cared about. For much of his working life, George had been employed in a factory in Aberdeen. When he was made redundant in the late 1970s, he needed to find another way to make ends meet. He became a taxi driver. It was not a job he particularly enjoyed. He knew it came with risks. His wife Jessie worried about him constantly during night shifts. The thought of him out there in the dark, picking up strangers, with no way of knowing who might get into the back of his car. George told her not to worry. He told her that if anyone ever tried to rob him, he would simply hand over the money and not fight. He was not a man who believed anything was worth dying for. On the evening of Thursday, 29th of September, 1983, George Murdoch was working his evening shift in his sky blue Ford Cortina taxi. It had been a miserable, wet day in Aberdeen, and the rain was still falling as the evening wore on. At around 8:30 that night, George was driving along Queen's Road in the west end of the city when a young man stepped out to flag him down. George pulled over. The man got into the back of the taxi. At 8:35 in the evening, George radioed his taxi control room. He told them he was heading with his passenger to a village west of Aberdeen. His voice was calm and routine. The last fare of the night, heading out of the city. It was the last time anyone heard from George Murdoch. Approximately 2 miles into the journey, the taxi turned off the main road onto a quieter road on the outskirts of the city, near the old Deeside railway line. The taxi stopped. The passenger attacked George with a cheese wire, looping it around his neck and using it as a garrote. The violence was immediate and extreme. As they struggled, the two men moved out of the taxi and onto the road. George Murdoch was calling for help. 2 teenage boys who happened to be cycling past saw the attack taking place in the road. They turned their bikes around immediately and rode off to raise the alarm. When police arrived at the scene, it was too late. George Murdoch was dead. He was 58 years old. The cheese wire was found lying nearby. George's wallet and fair money had been taken. approximately £21. Whether robbery was the primary motive for the attack has never been established. What was clear to investigators from the very beginning was that the passenger had brought the cheese wire with him when he got into George's taxi that night. He had not picked up a weapon of opportunity. He had come prepared. The callousness of that fact sent a chill through Aberdeen and through Scotland that did not quickly fade. The murder made headline news across the country. It was said at the time to have shocked the nation. In Aberdeen, where people had known George Murdoch or known of him, where the taxi trade was a familiar and trusted part of daily life, the killing sent shockwaves through the community. The killer was dubbed the cheese wire killer by the press. People asked, who gets into a taxi with a cheese wire? Who plans something like this? A major murder investigation was launched. 10,000 homes across Aberdeen and the surrounding area were visited by officers. 8,000 statements were taken. The cheese wire was forensically examined. Police released a replica image of the weapon publicly to assist with their appeals. A description of the killer was compiled from the accounts of those who had seen him. A man in his late 20s to early 30s, of thin build, approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall, with dark hair that sat over his ears. No one was arrested. No one was charged. The case went cold. Jessie Murdoch never recovered from what had happened to her husband. She had spent 37 years worrying about the risks he took in that taxi, and the one night her worst fears came true was the night that broke her. Her health declined in the years that followed. She was afraid in her own home, afraid that the man who had killed George might come back for her. She died on 24th March 2004, 21 years after George's murder, without ever knowing who had taken him from her. The investigation was never fully closed. Police Scotland's major investigation team continued to review the case as forensic techniques developed and new information occasionally came in. In 2004, 21 years after the murder, the case was featured on an STV documentary series about Scotland's most famous unsolved murders. In 2018, a fresh appeal was issued and a reward of £10,000 was offered for information leading to an arrest. In 2021, that reward was doubled to £20,000. In March 2022, the case was featured on BBC Crime Watch Live. The Murdoch family took part in the appeal. George's nephew, Alex Mackay, spoke publicly about his uncle and about the family's need for closure. Dozens of calls came in from members of the public across the world. Investigators said the case had clearly struck a chord. That despite the passage of nearly 40 years, people still remembered the night George Murdoch was killed and wanted to help give his family the answers they deserved. In September 2022, police made a new appeal for a specific individual, a man who had been seen at a sports bar on Market Street in Aberdeen in 2015. He was described as short and stocky, in his 60s or 70s at the time of the sighting, and wearing an Iron Maiden t-shirt. Police said they believed this man had information that could help solve the case and asked him to come forward. He has not done so. In September 2023, Police Scotland announced a significant breakthrough. Advances in forensic science had enabled scientists to identify a DNA profile from material recovered at the scene in 1983. Forensic scientist Sarah Walker, who led the examination of the evidence, described the range of items that had been preserved. cigarette ends found inside the taxi, coins, pens, the cheese wire itself, and George's jacket. In 2023, that material had finally yielded a usable DNA profile. It was loaded onto the National DNA Database. In September 2024, Police Scotland announced a further development. The DNA profile had been enhanced sufficiently to allow a familial DNA search, a technique that searches the database not for the individual whose DNA has been recovered, but for close relatives of that person, in cases where the individual's own DNA is not on the database. The search led investigators to the relative of a man convicted of killing a taxi driver in Yorkshire in 2006. That line of inquiry was pursued. It did not produce a direct breakthrough. The murder of George Murdoch remains officially unsolved. No one has ever been arrested. The man who got into the back of that sky blue Ford Cortina on Queen's Road in Aberdeen on the evening of 29th of September 1983 has never been identified. He was attacked with a weapon his killer had brought with him specifically for that purpose. His wife Jessie died without knowing who killed him. His nephew Alex McKay and the rest of the family are still waiting for that answer. Somewhere out there, someone knows. Hello everyone, thank you for listening and drop any feedback below. I would love to hear your thoughts and hope to see you again right here on Cold Case UK.